Welcome back to the Literacy Lunch Break. Today we are joined with Dr. Carrie Willer, Director of Elementary Education in Appleton, Wisconsin. We are so grateful that you could join us today, Carrie. Before we dig into the questions, we always like to have guests just share a little background about their experience and what led you to the position you're currently in.
Well, thank you, Marjorie, for having me today. I am very humbled and honored to have completed my 25th year within our Appleton area school district. I am a longtime resident of Appleton. I actually was a student that went through the Appleton area school district. So to continue my professional growth with the district has been really wonderful. We are the 6th largest district in the state of Wisconsin. We service about 15,000 students with about 1,500 staff members. We are 22 elementary schools strong and proud. We'll be opening 2 charter schools over the course of the next 2 years. And in my role, I have the privilege and the pleasure of overseeing our elementary literacy, math, science, and social study curriculum needs. In addition, I supervise our elementary site coaches, our math interventionists, our district coaches, and I was a former elementary principal, 13 years at the school that I once attended as a kid. And I was middle school assistant principal and a former French teacher. So I'm delighted to
have a wide range of experience, which I do think makes the best leaders, right? Is because you can, connect to all of those different experiences. I'm so grateful that our listeners get to hear from you today because, as you said, you are a very large district and you just mentioned many different responsibilities, many different roles that you serve in and you support. And this series really is targeting and focusing on the importance of leadership. And so I'm just going to kind of jump into our first question as we think about the importance of leadership and your experience that you've had. What do you see the role of school leadership when we think about promoting and enhancing literacy among elementary school students?
I think that leaders have the honor of safeguarding a sacred trust. Families send their children to us to give them a caring and supportive learning environment. They trust that we'll take good care of their babies, no matter what age their child is. But they also trust us to teach their children the necessary skills needed to be productive adults that contribute to our society. And so when I think of that, I think that literacy is the great equalizer in this equation. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we reference literacy as a gift. It's not a gift. It's actually a civil right. And I think leaders have that privilege and honor of serving student staff at either their site or their district. And I think to that point, a lot of times we are the reflection of the culture of learning that we see either in our sites or in our district. And so I think leaders, our job is not to create more followers, but it's to create more leaders and really help grow and foster that civil right so that every child has access and can express themselves and has access to wonderful opportunities across their life.
I absolutely love what you just said, right? It's not to create more followers, but to create more leaders and really to support educators in understanding the importance that you're right. This is not a gift, right? It is an equalizer and it is a civil right. And that is what should be at the forefront of everything we do. With that said, that can be really hard and it can be really tricky. So as you think about leading that charge and making sure that you are creating leaders, what are some things that you've put into place or that you have found effective in supporting teachers and educators across the board in making these important changes and providing that important instruction?
So I think our literacy journey started really 3 years ago. I think that it's important to recognize that it takes some time.
Yes.
It's not something that happens quickly or happens over time. And I think one of the things that we did that was really important is our first year, going back to 21-22, is that as a group of leaders, as district leaders, we really came together. We were not satisfied with how our data was indicating that our students were performing. We had a lot of concerns around that because year after year, we kept seeing the same data and we needed to kind of understand, why is this happening? And so we got together and we grew our own capacity around what should we be seeing for high leverage instructional routines? How does the brain learn to read?
Yes.
What can we do to expand our use of science-aligned instructional practices? And all of a sudden, the more we talked, the more we learned. We started having some same conversations and using the same vocabulary. This vision really became formed. And then we took that forward to the next year. And we had an opportunity then to say, okay, now that we know what we want to see, what's really happening? And I think one of our best moves that we did was we used practice. We designed a literacy audit to kind of give us an idea of what's taking place in terms of instructional practice. And so we used what we believed was best practices, what we learned from our vision, and we defined a phonics look for. And then our district literacy coaches went into our classrooms and we collected data across all grade levels, all schools, to see what was or wasn't happening. And that was really magical. We hadn't done that before, but that data enabled us to kind of identify our goals for continuous improvement. It told us what shifts we needed to make in instruction. It told us what we needed to look for in a resource, because our current resource just was not meeting our needs. Yes. And it also drove some of our professional development. And our teachers got really kind of excited about this work.
Yeah. And I think that's, I'm listening to you talk about, we know the importance of data, we know the importance of assessment, but we're not talking just about student data. You're talking about looking across the board of what's happening in classrooms and taking that data to inform your instruction, and, teachers being excited about the professional learning. And I think that's something that's really impactful and important as we think about leadership, is that professional development, right? We know how busy teachers are, right? Their plates are always full. It does not end. There's so many things I'm listening to you say, like social emotional needs. It's not, there's so many considerations. So when we think about the time that we're pulling teachers to build that learning and to support them and equip them, that importance of professional learning and making it meaningful and impactful and aligned, I think sounds, yes, of course, but we know that doesn't always happen, right?
Very true. And I think our teachers, we tried to involve them in every step. I think it's important that we do things with teachers rather than to teachers. And I think we set up another process then to do kind of a complete program evaluation, where we had scores of teachers across all schools, all grade levels, all subject areas come together and really have some courageous conversations around literacy, about what was working and what wasn't working. And then that enabled us this year then to really identify, wow, we need support, very strong support in phonemic awareness. We need some new resources to field test. We brought in Jan Birkins to kind of kick off the year and give us a little excitement. And we studied her Shifting the Balance book study, which was great. And we did our PD focused around some of the areas from our literacy audit. And our teachers really shifted from being a very, very strong, balanced literacy district to one that's very excited for structured literacy and really engaged in learning and shifting practice. I think it was a great shock to me, because if you were to tell me 3 years ago when I started this position, you're going to put aside balanced literacy, you're going to put aside some reading recovery, you're going to put aside the concept of level text, and you're going to shift to an entirely new methodology, I would have thought, I don't know about that.
Right.
But now we do. And we actually, by the time school will start, we'll have over 400 of our elementary teachers who will have gone through professional development with our new resource that they signed up for voluntarily during the summer. And I think that just speaks to the excitement and the enthusiasm.
Yes. So I'm going to, dig in a little bit more about that, because I think that's a big challenge, is shifting the mindset, right? Especially when I've been teaching for so long. And I feel like every educator has the same story as well, though, right? We started out this way. I always share, I started as a 6th grade reading and language arts teacher, and I was like, what am I doing? And, I taught with level text, I taught guided reading. And, for some of us, maybe that shift of, okay, I need to make a change is a little bit easier. But for some of us, it's a little bit harder, because teaching is such a passionate profession, and we care so much about what we're doing. And so I think sometimes it's a hard shift. So how did you kind of build that in? I heard you say one thing that I think is important is time. And that, I think, is also a challenge, right? We know that it takes time to make changes, but at the same time, we know how important these changes are. So as we think about helping teachers, make a shift if there's one to be made, what were some ways, you've supported that, or, as you think back to shifting and making these changes, was there anything that kind of really stands out to where your teachers were like, this was helpful, or this is something that helped me respond well to making some changes, or even being open to listening and rethinking?
I think that our story is very similar to others in the sense that we have years and years and years of benchmark assessments that showed us that 65 to 70% of our students were reading at grade level. But then all of a sudden, our state assessments and our district assessments indicated that we were closer to maybe 35%. Mm-hmm. So we had this dichotomy, and we had it for year after year after year. And finally, I think we got to the point where we came together and we said, we can't continue to not look at this data. What's causing it? And so one of the pieces that I think really helped all of us was actually twofold. We recognized that within our district and our state assessments, those assessments don't drill down low enough. They don't go down to the phonemic level. So we were missing this great opportunity to change our instruction. And so this past year, we incorporated a phonics screener. And, adding another assessment to a busy teacher's plate had me a little nervous. I wasn't sure how this was going to go over, but our teachers really wrapped around this. And in conversation, they kept telling me how wonderful it was to actually have an assessment that showed them right away these incredible gaps that they didn't know existed. Yeah. Here we had readers they thought were at grade level, but kids had trouble with long vowels. Or we had readers who could comprehend but couldn't decode, or we had readers who could decode but couldn't comprehend. And so I think that really showed us, wow, we need to make some changes. And having that literacy audit came in for all of us in a really safe space. And it wasn't focused on individual teachers. It wasn't meant to evaluate anyone, but it really showed us instructional practices. And it really told us, wow, our resource is not helping us. We can't have teachers spending hours and hours and hours finding, a plethora of different resources. So it really helped move.
Yeah. So, that's what you mentioned as well as something that often happens. So it sounds like you're not just assessing, because sometimes we just get in that habit of just, okay, we assessed and, we color code the red, the yellow, the green, and then, all right, next round, oh, they're still red or they're still yellow. But if that's happening, understanding why, and I think you're right, teachers want to know why, and I think back to the leveled readers and the assessments of the letters, but you would walk away, you don't really know why that student is a letter, J, or are they, is it the long vowels? Is it multisyllabic words? So giving them the opportunity to assess, you're right, it's adding to the plate, but I think as long as we know it's meaningful, and that can drive my instruction. But also what you just mentioned that I heard, and I think is so important, is then you're provided the resources, right? Because sometimes we're like, okay, we need to make these shifts. So look, we're noticing this, and then this is what I have to teach. And that's not matching the need. So aligning the assessment, supporting teachers and understanding the assessment, but also supporting them with the resources and the knowledge building.
And they were really excited. They were very excited to have the new resources. And once they started to see, okay, here's the need the student has, here's the resource, and it's all laid out for me. How easy is this? It started to shift our universal instruction. It started to shift our tier 2 instruction, because now we weren't intervening our way out of it. We were using universal instruction to support the needs of our kids, which was really great. And our teachers kind of came around that and said, okay, we want to learn more about blending lines. What does it mean to segment and delete? Yeah. So then our professional development came in and kind of wrapped around all of that, to the point that our teacher said, okay, now we have a new foundational skills resource. Let's make sure we go into comprehensive and really, really do a good job. And they started asking for more. But we spend a lot of time talking and listening to our teachers. And that's the best thing we can possibly do. And I think they were also supercharged because they started to hear from parents how wonderful the resource was.
Oh, yes, that's wonderful.
And I remember one of our principals had sent an email with a video of a third grader who really had been a struggling reader. And now with the new resource, all of a sudden was reading and happy and then starting to read to his younger brother. And the mom just was so happy. And that really was such a motivator for our teachers to hear this is impactful and it's making a difference.
Yeah. And it's so important to share those success stories. I'm hearing you talk a lot about teacher feedback and teachers kind of defining or identifying what they need PD on or what they want to learn more about. You are in a large district. So how do you, I mean, just a former building administrator, not even leading a district, I know how hard it was to plan those PD days, look at the calendar, make sure everybody was getting the support that they needed. And it can be varied sometimes. So how do you manage even just the suggestions? I think if I'm a building or district leader, I might be thinking, well, how do you even just organize that? And then how does that professional learning look? Does everybody get the same thing? Do they have choices? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So this year was the first year that we had full day of professional development. In the past, we had maybe 2 hours a month during a late start for our district. So this was really exciting to have a full day. And so for us, it was really easy because now you have this literacy audit that really clearly identified some practice areas we wanted to identify. And so we knew that we needed to focus on blending. We knew we needed to talk about orthographic mapping. And so those areas came so clearly. And they were also areas of engagement that our teachers had with the new resource that they could see, wow, this is the why behind we're doing this in this resource. And we contracted with our local CISA, and we brought in a literacy expert from our local CISA who every month kind of unpacked some of this for our teachers. And I think that having that opportunity, it was focused for them. They saw the relevancy, but then we let them talk and process through it. And we gave every teacher one of Jan Birkin's Shifting the Balance books. Yes. And they had an opportunity to unpack that as a book study in a really safe space. Yeah. So for those really passionate balanced literacy individuals, they could see that making a few shifts was helpful and not as maybe intimidating as what they originally thought was going to take place.
Yeah, so really sustainable and supportive through the year. And I love Shifting the Balance. I think that is such a phenomenal book to get started. And it's not anything that's kind of, coming down and like pounding down on it's small shifts and a respectful conversation, I would say. Like that book is written in such a respectful way for us to address maybe some shifts or changes that need to be made. Well, we've talked a lot about success. But I think, again, if I'm an administrator listening to this, I think we know that there are going to be challenges. As you said, you were already kind of preparing yourself for some challenges that thankfully didn't even occur, but I'm assuming some did. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the challenges and how you overcame them, or again, this is a work in progress, right? It's not a light switch. So are continuing to evolve or try to overcome some of the challenges.
Right. Absolutely. I think that, we took 3 years to get to this point to have a new resource. And so next year we'll be in year 1 of implementation. So that brings a whole nother set of challenges. But I can't help but to think about, Wiley Blevins talks a lot about how our nation's students spend the first 2 years in school focused on reading texts by memorizing sight words and story patterns. But they lack in those text words that they can pull out sounds based on the phonics skills that they're learning. And we really resonated with that. And we thought as we're learning, you come to this point of having an epiphany of, wow, now that I see what this can and should look like, and I understand the 4-part processing system and how the brain learns to read, I can't go back to doing what I always did. So our challenge was to try to take hundreds of teachers and get them to this point where we could really identify the why in which we needed to shift practice. And then from that, making sure that we could find a good resource for them to lean into so that they wouldn't have to continue to find their own resources.
Yes.
And I think that was helpful. And we had a really tough decision as a district. We were set to roll out a new math textbook, and we had to pause that because our work with ELA was so important. We couldn't ignore what we were doing and what we were learning. So we elected to pause that for a little bit in honor of teacher capacity with all of this change. And our teachers really embraced all of that. I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, that that couldn't have been an easy decision, but I think such an important one because, as you said, to respect teacher capacity, I think that's an important thing to consider as we make shifts or changes within districts is while we want to change everything right now, just piling it on doesn't mean it's going to change. And so being really thoughtful and ensuring that we're allowing these changes to occur while respecting the capacity of educators and making sure that it's done well. I always like to ask before we end, if someone were listening, whether it's an administrator, an educator, anyone that's really recognizing this need for a shift, which really truly is happening across the US, right? We're all thankfully having this conversation, and I think it's a sustainable conversation. I think in the past it's kind of been hit or miss, but I think this is something I'm very excited about. I think our country is finally recognizing this has to shift, and it's been a bigger conversation than it's ever been. But if I have, been living in a district that has been very rooted in some previous practice, and I'm trying to make this shift, there's so many pieces to it. But if you could give just one takeaway, if you wanted somebody who was listening to just walk away with one thing, what would that takeaway be?
I think that we know that the process takes time and we understand that. But I think as leaders, we have to be unrelenting around the urgency for change. Our kids can't wait. So we have to really set the why with our staff. And we really have to make sure that we give our teachers time and space to process and talk. And whatever we do, I think we implement with integrity. We talk a lot about we're going to implement a new resource with fidelity. But fidelity is really a compliance piece. And I think that when we get to that point that we're going to implement for us, like our message going forward is we are going to implement with integrity to use the resource to the best of our skills and ability to make sure that we can achieve the results that the resource says we should get. I think that's really helpful for us as we look ahead. And we know that there's no perfect resource. There's no perfect fix. It's a little bit, I suppose, like a weight loss. The weight didn't pack on all of a sudden in one day and it's not going to come off on the other day, but we make steps each and every day to get stronger and better, and we grow and we just keep on moving forward.
I absolutely love that. We couldn't have ended on a better note. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, for sharing your expertise. I am so glad our listeners get to hear and learn from you. Thank you for being a guest today.
Well, thank you for having me. And I can't wait to tell our students a shout out to Johnston and Jefferson Elementary School that I had a chance to meet the famous Mrs. Botari who comes into their classroom every day. Thank you very much.
Love it. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we explore literacy topics in a snack-sized, easily digestible format.